Next, I'd like to invite, I believe next is Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, our monthly budget report. And after this report and some questions, I will be seeking a motion. So, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Morning, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. This is a perpetual agenda item for the board to, or for staff to provide the board a monthly review of the status of funds, or what amounts to what's called the monthly budget report. For the record, the Utah State Board of Education remains financially solvent and able to meet all of their contracted and or other types of obligations and commitments for the remainder of state fiscal year 20 and beyond. What we do is we provide an interactive report to you so that, and I'm just going to spend a little bit more time with the chair's approval because we have new board members to orient them to the schedule or to the report that we provide. The report that we provide has the ability for you to, for lack of a better term, drill down so that you can see or, monitor, if you will, particular expenditures. The Utah State Board of Education does what's called program accounting, where we account for all the dollars down to the absolute penny for all of the appropriations that we receive, both what stays within the internal budget of the Utah State Board of Education and that which flows through to the local education agencies or LEAs. It's divided out by section, if you will, within the Utah State Board of Education so that you can go to a particular section if there's something that interests you. The staff provide excellent levels of service here to the LEAs and or to the students or on an individual basis. Then once you're inside the section, again, it's broken down by program and provides you the ability to see what the status of funds are. There is a lag in the report, meaning that for this particular month, we're looking at the July, right? Yeah, the end of July, the status of funds as of the end of July, which is period one of the start of the state fiscal year. The state fiscal year runs from July to June every year. Chair, subject to any specific or other questions by members of the board, that concludes this particular portion of the monthly budget update, which is the monthly budget report.
I'm not seeing any. Will you please continue?
So we always provide, as part of this update or part of this agenda item, the board's discretionary status of funds. Since we just did start a new year, so to speak, state fiscal year 20, this is an item that that we respectfully request the board take action on. Previous iterations of this process, we identify particular if you will, perpetual or precedent-setting board motion or board status of funds for particular projects or programs. Those are listed on the left of this report. That's also displayed for the public. The dollar amounts. So we'll start with the first one, which is the contingency. The board each year typically takes action. This is why we put it in front of you each year for renewal. To set aside $200,000 for contingency purposes. Contingencies could amount from anything to or resulting in the need for the board to make a decision to utilize this money. It's different from the next line item, which is a legal contingency fund that we set aside each year or ask or respectfully request that you mandate or adopt by way of the motion that we'll get to here in a minute. Then it follows all of the different items here. Some of them are continuations of previous authorizations by the board that we put in front of you for your review and action to either adopt or renew the particular line items that we're proposing there in the column beginning on the left. I want to orient all board members to the report and especially the upper right-hand corner of the report. These are your beginning balances for the year across a variety of fund sources or fund types, state funds, federal mineral lease, and shows the beginning balance and what's remaining that you have not obligated yet, or and that's what we're seeking here today, is to start that process of obligating or committing funds for particular uses. Again, dropping down to the second column on the left for specific purposes, and the amounts flowing to the right and the sources from which those dollars would come from to support at your will or at your direction by way of the upcoming motion for staff to execute during state fiscal year 20. Chair, subject to any questions of what I've presented this for, the staff respectfully request the motion.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other board member. I am now. Board member Belknap.
I just want to make this motion, that the board continue the use of identified discretionary funds amounts for prior years from state fiscal year of 2020.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Board Member Bolter. Discussion to that motion. Board Member Janet Cannon.
Yeah. You went a little fast for me.
sorry.
I'm looking at the state superintendent contingency.
Yes.
Can you describe what that does?
Sure.
That money does?
That is an amount of money that we ask the board to designate or set aside for the use of the superintendent at her discretion throughout the year. It can be a variety of, we always do, make sure it's an allowable use of the funds, but that's the amount that we've previously set aside for this, specific to the superintendent or for her use.
I know that, may I
Please continue.
I know that previously there have been quite large amounts and that other superintendents have utilized that money to do like exploratory enrichment programs and that type of thing in different schools. Is this sufficient funding for the superintendent to have opportunities to do anything like that in our schools?
Chair, if I may, just to provide some historical context, I think you're probably relating your experience as a previous board member to your tenure now on the board. The decision back maybe 3-4 years ago was to lower the amount of the discretionary amount that's allocated by the board to the superintendent. That doesn't mean you can't change that, though. So then for your question about is this sufficient, I'd defer to the superintendent if she wants to make any comment or answer the question through the chair.
Superintendent Dixon, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Huntsman. Prior to my tenure, we had federal mineral lease money, so there was, the superintendent actually had a budget for some internal needs, and then the federal mineral lease money was that experimental developmental money that would go out for projects. That money, I don't even know if we have any, if we do, it's very minimal.
We do.
But
It's
that
lower.
is not part of my budget any longer. And so those projects that go out to LEAs generally come out of some other departments as part of a grant or very content-specific project that are very data-driven. So the budget that I have is set aside so that staff could come and say, we found this opportunity that will really help with this strategy, and it will cost $5,000, and we don't have it in our budget. And so my budget is usually spent on internal to support external, if that makes sense. So it's really augmenting what departments maybe don't have, they have limited funds, maybe they're tied up in a grant or something else, or they haven't had the funds, and things arise throughout the year. So we try to set some aside to meet those needs that arise. And I'm pretty generous with my budget. We try to make sure that it's targeted at the right goals and not just other things. But staff is so good about asking for the right things, so.
Just,
Can I follow up just
Yes.
with a comment? Just a question to you first, Scott. I know that oil prices were down a few years ago and that they've kind of come back. And I heard you mention federal mineral lease monies, and have they risen with the comeback of the price of oil?
Not significantly or not much. There was a severe decline, to your point, answering your question through the chair, of those energy prices that resulted in a significant decrease in the amount of federal mineral lease money the board has received over the past 2 to 4 years. You're right, energy prices have risen, but we haven't seen, while we've seen an increase, it hasn't been significant.
Not significant.
And not to the levels that, back to the superintendent's point, would be along the lines of prior to her tenure here would have been the levels that you were seeing in when you were your previous tenure on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not up that high.
And just one other comment. What I'm thinking of is some years ago, I know that one of our superintendents put in a program at Jackson Elementary in Salt Lake District and provided violins for a music training in Jackson Elementary that we had an opportunity to go and see the difference that it had made in this school, which had very high mobility of students. There were drive-by shootings. It was a school that really needed some help. And this little music program turned these children into violin students. It taught them a love of music. Their parents were so thrilled that the children were getting some kind of musical education that they wouldn't be able to provide otherwise. And they were learning how to attend concerts. And I remember going in and seeing one little boy in kind of a ragged white T-shirt. And I asked him if he knew how to play the violin, and he said, "I am a fourth-year violin student." And he was so proud. And so I think that our superintendents have used this kind of money wisely, and I would love to give our own superintendent a little more opportunity to do some of those kinds of things. Thank you.
And just to add a little context to this is, we certainly have that opportunity if the superintendent needs something or needs more, but just some background on this. But I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, we didn't have any. It was like down to zero. I referred to it as finding change down in the couch. I mean, and so then we came up with this budget here that kind of protects us a little bit, gives us some legal room or some wiggle room, and then we identified key things, legal budget, the superintendent, et cetera. So this has been a conservative course to a certain degree, and I know our fellow education partners out there that are looking at budgets track this aggressively too, and so if there is something, we certainly can add to it, but this is just moving forward, and it comes this time of year, and so I just want to bring the motion back that's before the board, and that this is all about our transparency and having things, dotting our i's and crossing our t's. But the motion before the board is that the board continue the use of identified discretionary amounts from prior years for the 2020 fiscal year 2020 budget. Is that correct? Board Member Belknap? Is that what you stated?
Yep. And it's up there. The motion's up.
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, it's right here. All right. It's here too. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Voting is unanimous. Thank you.
Chair, that concludes this particular agenda item, subject to any further questions or concerns from the board.
Seeing none, you're excused. We have a time certain in about 5 minutes, and that is on our school trust lines. And I know a few board members just come flying in here, so let's take a quick, about 7-minute break if you need to hit the facility and that, and then we'll get right back to our agenda.